Today we're going to be talking about mesh size and making sure that you're using the right mesh size to be most efficient with your ink. Most screen printers only have a few number of mesh sizes, and the most popular being 110. Well, 110 lets a lot of ink through the screen at once. That's great if you need a lot of ink down on the shirt at once. But here's a couple things to consider. If the ink is thinner, if you don't need a lot of ink down on the shirt at once, or if you're going to flash print anyway, printing through a 110 mesh actually could be wasting ink for your printing operation. So what we're going to show you today is we're going to do some testing using white ink on a black garment printing through several different mesh sizes. Today we'll be printing through a 110 mesh versus a 125 mesh, 156 mesh, and even a 230 mesh. We'll do some weight comparisons and some cost comparisons on the ink savings that you could use by going through a higher mesh. Today we're going to be printing with Ryonet white ink. Here we are right here. It's a nice fresh batch. The Ryonet white ink is a super opaque but very creamy white. Now a lot of screen printers like to reduce their white down. Typically, reducing your white down will decrease the opacity, so we do not recommend reducing it down unless you're going for a nice distressed soft hand feel. What you do want to do is when you open up your ink, stir it up and agitate it. Make sure that you get it flowing and moving, because if you use it right out of the container, especially if it's been sitting on the shelf for a while or even open, going right out of the container is not the best thing. So stir it up, really activate it up real nice and well so it gets nice and creamy, gets those molecules moving in the ink. Once that's stirred up, we're going to start with our 110 mesh screen. Here we have our 110 mesh. These screens are all coated the same exact way, one-in-one coating method with a dual cure emulsion. So we're going to place some ink down in this inkwell here of this mesh, and then we'll go to print. Grab our shirt first. And we're going to be doing this all with a print flash print. So we've done other videos on how to do a killer one-pass white, but this is not the objective. The objective is to get a smooth white, and most printers will do a print flash print no matter what. So 110 mesh, first of all, here we go. We're going to do a flood first. Make sure that ink's flowing nicely. This is our base coat. Pretty nice and bright, but probably not going to be the only white we do. So we'll flash that like most printers would do and then hit it with another pass. The second pass we're not going to flood because we're doing a top white. There we have a nice, soft, smooth white going through a 110 mesh screen. Very nice and bright as well. Now we'll do the same thing through a 125 mesh screen. So this is a little bit higher mesh size, not drastically higher, but a little higher. We're going to do a print flash print. Now this is a 125 mesh, so the next step up. There's our base plate. And now our top white. So there we have it. Just as bright, through a little bit higher mesh screen. Now we're going through a 156 mesh screen. Same print, same two strokes. Now with our prints, we're doing all the first whites with two passes and then the top white with just one pass. There we are. Nice, bright white once again. 156 screen. Now we're going to do 230 mesh, so we're going all the way up to 230. Same two prints first, flash, and then there's our underbase, and now one overhit. And a pretty darn bright white at that. Now it's time to measure our work. All these shirts have been properly cured through the dryer. We have a shirt with no ink on it, shirt with 110 mesh, 125 mesh, 156 mesh, and 230 mesh. Remember, they're all printed the same exact way. 2 prints, a flash, and then 1 final print. Let's start out by zeroing out the scale with our blank shirt. This particular scale is reading to the 10th of a gram, so it's fairly accurate. I'm going to zero that out to give us an equal starting point. We're also using a quart container that's been zeroed out to place the shirts in so they all get weighed correctly. Now we're going to start out with our 110 mesh. This is the 110 mesh here. I'm going to take some measurements. So that's 13.0. 110 equals 13.0. Now this is our 125. 125 equals 10.9. 156 mesh, 8.9. And then finally our 230 mesh, which comes in at 5.2. Let's read those numbers off again. 110 mesh, 13 grams, 125 mesh, 10.9 grams, 156, 8.9 grams, and then 230, 5.2 grams. So as you go up in mesh size, obviously you're putting less ink down on the shirt. In our screen printing money savings tips article, we actually break it down to you based on the whole opening of the mesh. You can read the article and actually see an actual spreadsheet that goes over those percentage savings, but let's run a quick breakdown through and see if our numbers equal out. 125 mesh versus 110 mesh, about a 24 to 25% ink savings. 156 mesh, about a 37% ink savings. 200 mesh, 46%, and then a 230 mesh, 59% ink savings. So if we do the math on this, you can see those numbers are relatively close to the numbers that our mesh calculations are actually giving us based on the whole opening micron of the mesh. I'm going to have Nikki Steffen actually go over these shirts with me as a product expert of fashion and tell me which one looks the best as far as its hand, which is the feel of the shirt, and the brightness of the white. So why don't you examine these 4 shirts, Nikki?
All right, I got the glasses on. Let's do this. Okay. Looks all right. That one feels good. That one feels better. That one looks better too. And, well, is that just because somebody missed that dot, or?
Don't critique my work, Nikki.
All right. I think this one, I like this one. This one, the end. This one feels good, but I can't say that it looks the best. I like this one, and it looks good.
Okay, so overall, the brightness and overall feel and look, this one felt a little better, but this one's a little bit crisper.
Yeah, and definitely this last one was out, but this one has a little bit of a, I don't know, it just looks a little crisper, and it also, the hand on it, it feels a little better. It's a little more pleasing to me.
All right. Well, you picked the right one.
Oh, good. Yes.
This one's printed with the 156 mesh. This one with the 230 mesh.
Oh, okay.
This one with the 125 mesh, and this one with the 110 mesh.
Ah.
So as a print, these three, personally, I think these three all look very good, consistent as far as the brightness. This one's not nearly as bright. 230 mesh, quite a bit higher mesh. But, I mean, in the feel, this one's got a pretty soft hand. This one's got a pretty soft hand. So this one, basically, the purpose of this test was to prove that we're saving 32% on ink by printing through a 156 mesh, but it looks just as good as the 110 mesh. So if you're printing through a 156 print flash print on a white, you're going to be saving 30+% on your ink. Now the purpose of this example is to show that you can use higher mesh sizes for the majority of your prints. So you should really invest in a mesh repertoire so you actually have more choices. I know a lot of screen printers, for instance, that do print white ink, print flash print, especially on automatics, through a 230 mesh screen. Now, if they're using 110 mesh, you're saving so much money in ink by using that 230 mesh screen. A couple other rules to follow. Obviously, black ink's a much thinner ink. It doesn't need as much pigment load in it because it's covering lighter garments. So whenever you're going on lighter garments and you're using thinner inks, go through higher mesh screens. Never use black ink, for instance, on a 110, even a 156. You can print it through a 200, 230 mesh screen all day long. Same thing with light garments, white, light natural colors. If you're using opaque inks or if you're using even a red ink, you can reduce that ink down, let's say 10, 20, maybe even higher, to lower the cost of the ink and to be able to print through that high mesh. You can go through 200, 230 mesh screen, maybe even a 280 mesh screen, and save a lot of ink versus printing through a 110 or 156. So take that into consideration in choosing the screens for your job so you're not wasting money when it comes to ink.